Previously, we gone through what is meant by transaction. Transaction is a unit of work and it performs a group of tasks from top to bottom. Like the transaction is initiated when the transaction is initiated, it performs a transaction. A group of tasks were initiated from top to bottom. The group of tasks were executed. After the completion of all the tasks, then the transaction will be completed. Transaction is successful. Here it is the properties of transaction. Properties in the sense, what are the properties a transaction should have? What are the online transaction processing systems were there? Those transaction systems should have these properties for those transactions. What are the transactions they were making? Those transactions should have these properties. When these properties were there only, the transaction will be 100% effective. The transaction will be processed 100% efficiently. Transaction will be successful. The CICS is having these four transactions, so it is an efficient transaction system. It is a reliable transaction system. It performs the transactions in seconds, so it is reliable, and the transactions were efficient, so it is an efficient transaction system. Those two properties were made because of the four properties: atmosity, consistency, isolation, and durability, shortly termed as an acid. Atomicity, update only after 100% posted, about update. Update in the sense, like in database, what are the contents to be updated after 100% processed or about. Like if the when the KICS is processing the transaction has reached up to 70%. When the transaction is reached to 70%, due to some failure, the transaction is stopped. The transaction is stopped at 70% because of a failure. It should not update any contents in the database. Like when the transaction is aborted, like the transaction is stopped at 70%, the KICS shouldn't update any contents in the transaction. The KICS should delete all the about the transaction. The KICS should about the transaction and delete all the traces of the transaction. Like nothing should be there for the next transaction. We have to do it from the first. From the first, we have to perform the transaction. Nothing will be continued. The transaction which is stopped at 70% will be terminated, deleted. All the traces will be deleted, aborted. Only 100% successful. When the transaction is 100% completed, 100% successful only, the contents will be updated in the database, or else the contents were deleted. There will be no trace of the transaction. All the traces were deleted. There is no even a single trace that the transaction is performed. Consistency, second property is consistency. Consistency in the sense, accept only valid data. It should accept only valid data. What is the transaction processing system is there, it should accept only only valid data. For ATM, when we insert the ATM card, it will ask for ATM pin. ATM pin, we will enter only numerical numbers. It shouldn't accept any alphanumeric, like alphabetical order, or like alphabetical numbers and other numbers. It should accept only numerical numbers, 1 2 3. It should accept that numbers only. It should accept only numbers. It shouldn't accept any alphabet numbers, alphabet letters, small letter, capital letter. Nothing will be accepted. It will accept only numerical data. Numerical data here is termed as a valid data. Alphabet numbers, alphabet letters, capital letters, small letters, everything is termed as invalid data, and the transaction processing system will not accept the data. Transaction processing system will not accept the data. Isolation. Isolation in the sense, it is a property of an online transaction processing system. It should separate each transaction in the sense, hundreds of thousands of lakhs of users were accessing a transaction system at the same time. They all will access the transaction system at the same time. When they all were accessing the transaction system at the same time, performing the transaction simultaneously. No user should depend on another user should perform a transaction. Every transaction should be individual and every transaction should be processed. The dependency is not appeared in online transaction processing system. No user, it won't ask help for any other user, it won't ask any user permissions. Every user transaction is isolated, every user transaction is independent. No user is disturbed or the no user, it won't provide any inconvenience to other user. When one user is making a transaction, it is an isolation property. Durability, it should withstand failure after 100% processor. When the transaction is 100% processor, it should withstand failure. For example, in flight ticket booking, like when we are booking flight tickets, when we are booking flight tickets, we entered all the details and we referred all the class, we given the number and we gave account details and we made the transaction. When the transaction is 100% completed, we paid the money is debited and the money is credited. After the transaction is 100% completed, we should receive a message like the details should be updated in database. Only when the details are updated in database only we will receive the message like the money is debited and the money is credited. Here from here only it is transferred to the bank. Like when 100% processed, it should update details in the database or else it will occur a great loss. It will cause a great loss. It should update the details in the database. That property is called durability. After the completion of the transaction 100%, it should withstand any failure. Like it should use another backup. Like if the kick server is failed, then it should this kick server if this kick transaction server is failed in this flight ticket booking, it should have a backup. It should have a backup kicks. It should have a backup. From that backup, it should update the contents in the database. And the user should receive a message within an hour, in a day, or it will give a time. Then the user should update the contents in the database, and the user should get a credited and the debited message, and the transaction is successful message for the user. That property is termed as a durability. These four properties shown here, the every transaction online transaction processing system should have these four properties. Whenever the online transaction is having these four properties, then it is a efficient and ideal transaction processing system. KICS is having these four properties, then the KICS is also termed as an ideal transaction processing system. It is an efficient and a reliable transaction processing system. Atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability. It is shortly termed as an ACID. Atomicity in the sense only after 100% processed, the transaction is 100% processed only, the kick should update the contents in the database or else it should abort. Consistency, you should accept only valid data. Valid data in the sense numeric data means you should accept only numeric data. Here the numeric data will be termed as an valid data. Alphabet letters, capital letters, small letters, every other data is termed as invalid data. It should reject the data. Isolation means many users simultaneously access the database and perform the transaction simultaneously. Every user should be isolated. One user transaction shouldn't affect another user transaction. Both users should know there should be no inconvenience for the both users, and both users should perform the transaction separately, individually. Durability, it should withstand any failure after the 100% processed. If the after the completion of 100% the transaction, the details should be updated in the database. The transaction is 100% completed. The details must and should be updated in the database.